Business Investment Summit 2021 is brought to you by ICICIdirect.com. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Outlook Business Investment Summit 2021. The topic for discussion now is PE relevant as an investment metric? As we all know, PE lost its relevance long time ago as a statistical tool. Benjamin Graham topped the world and succeeded with the strategy of investing in low PE stocks. But that evolved into a more sophisticated way of investing and looking at earnings from the prism of quality, predictability, durability, as professed by Warren Buffett. And as the world of investing got accustomed to paying a quality premium for these companies, the heightened uncertainty over the past few years, the low interest rates, and the way technology is disrupting traditional businesses has brought back the debate on the utility of PE and how this magic number needs to be. I don't know if it's magical. That's what we're going to debate now, whether it is magical at all or not, and how this is to be interpreted. I have with me today two very sharp investment minds. Sunil Singhania, he's a familiar face from the Indian investing scene, having spent a large part of his career managing funds for Reliance Mutual Fund, which is now Nippon India Mutual Fund with great success. And now he runs his own PMS, Abacus Asset Managers. On the other side, I have Saurabh Mukherjee. He's had a remarkable career trajectory so far. He started out 13 years ago in the Indian markets, built a broking business for Ambit, and now manages his own PMS, Marcellus Investment Managers. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on this discussion today. Saurabh, I'm going to start with you. In the context of technology stocks in the US, which have built an immutable moat for themselves, the market is happy to value them very richly in terms of higher and higher multiples, irrespective of whether they have earnings or not. They get valued richly because of their potential future profits. But in the context of India, where you still have a dominance of old economy, brick and mortar type of companies with predictable earnings and a linear growth trajectory, how justified are high PEs? I do know that you hold the view that PE is not really a relevant metric to look at anymore, but can you please articulate on that thought?
So thank you for inviting me, Mahalakshmi. It's a privilege being here. It's a privilege being on the same panel as Sunil Singhania, a man I've learned a lot from. Right? It's been, while these 13 years in India have been great fun, it's been great fun because people like Sunil have taught us a lot. In fact, a lot of what I'm going to tell you about, talk to you about, is driven by a chat that I had in Sunil's offices a couple of months ago. So when there was a lull in COVID, I was fortunate enough to get an audience with a great man in his office. And that chat, right, made me think about a lot of the subjects. So let me put on the table what is actually quite easy to understand. And then I'll tell you where I think there's a debate to be had. If you look at the challenge around PE multiples, why do people say that the relevance of PE is going down? There are broadly three areas where the E, the denominator of PE, doesn't do justice to the franchise. Right? The first area is accounting and governance. So, for example, if you were to compare two housing finance companies, Dewan Housing Finance and HDFC, and I'm saying we could have done this 3 years ago. I don't think anybody on their right mind watching the show would compare Dewan's earnings with HDFC's earnings on an equal footing, right? Accounting, governance, Deepak Parekh on the one side, the other one's on the other side. It's chalk and cheese, right? So the E in PE does not help you capture the apples versus oranges nature of accounting, quality, and governance between two companies in the same industry. The second challenge is on capital intensity, right? So in franchises where capital intensity is low, the E captures basically the free cash flow. Why are we interested in free cash flow? Because to grow your business, you have to reinvest. If it's a capital intensive business, you have to reinvest a lot. If it's a capital light business, your reinvestment requirements are low. So in capital light businesses, the E basically captures free cash flow. In capital intensive businesses, the E really captures very little. And I can explain this to you using two companies from the same corporate group, TCS versus Tata Steel, right? TCS generates around $2.5 billion of free cash flow in a given year. Tata Steel in the last 10 years put together has generated $2.5 billion of free cash flow, right? TCS's profits are only around 5 times that of Tata Steel. TCS's profits are only 5 times, but its free cash flow is around 11 times that of Tata Steel. The result is because Tata Steel struggles to generate a lot of cash, its profit growth over the last 10 years has been close to zero. Whereas TCS is a steady 15-16% profit grower, right? And so two companies, same corporate group, equal standards of accounting governance, hopefully, but one is cash generative, the other is capital intensive, and therefore the E doesn't really tell you much about the story. And the final dimension was the dimension we were discussing, right? E does not capture barriers to entry, whether they are barriers to entry driven by technology or barriers to entry driven by a smart management team. So, for example, let's take two high PE stocks. Let's take Jubilant FoodWorks and Nestle, both high PE stocks, both Delhi-based companies for what it's worth. Whilst I'm a great fan of Jubilant FoodWorks' product, right, even though at my age I probably shouldn't be, but I'm a great fan of Domino's Pizza. I don't think Domino's has the sort of monopoly in pizza that Nestle has in infant milk powder. The PE is not going to capture the barrier to entry. So the overall result ends up being that a low PE stock could be a bad investment. A high PE stock could be a good investment, right? Now, what sort of price metrics? We all try to make money from investing. What can we come up with? What metrics can we use which simplifies the job of your audience, right? And the metric I found which works beautifully in India is not PE or PB or EV EBITDA. It's free cash flow growth. If you or I or Sunil ji can predict the next 10 years of free cash flow growth, you can basically capture 60-70% of what you need to capture as a fund manager, right? Free cash flow growth has become the main driver of valuations. Now, it's easy to do free cash flow growth on old style, manufacturing and steel companies where the underlying variables are quite simple. It's hard to forecast free cash flows in companies where technology plays a big role, where intellectual property plays a big role, right? Companies like a TCS or indeed, say, even a Dr. Lal Path Labs, right? It's a capital light businesses which are driven by knowledge and intellectual property, right? Is becoming very hard to do free cash flow growth forecasting because these are not mean reverting franchises where return on capital goes to cost of capital. In many of these franchises, the best ones, the return on capital is just shooting into the sky, right? So even a franchise like Pidilite, ROC is risen now for I think 25-30 years at around 25%, right? And if you do the backward maths, if a company can grow EPS at say 25% for 5 years, and uske baad the EPS fades, it should trade around 25-30 times earnings. The same company, if EPS goes this 25% for 15 years, the warranted PE is 80 times. Same company, if EPS growth is 25% for 25 years, the warranted PE is 250 times. Pidilite has been growing free cash flow at 25% for 25 years. It should have been 250 times at the turn of the century, right? It wasn't, and therefore whoever bought Pidilite or Asian Paints or Nestle then obviously made a huge killing. And this is where the job gets hard. We understand where PE works. We understand where PE doesn't. We all understand we need to get a grip on free cash flow growth. But because of the power of technology and intellectual property, that's become a much harder job for people like us over the last 5 years than it was, say, when I came to India in 2008.
So, Sunil, do you want to respond to that?
No, thanks a lot, Saurabh, for the good words. And it's always nice to catch up with Saurabh and have very aggressive and intellectual decisions. And thanks, Mahalakshmi, for inviting me here. So, there are 2-3 things. One is, we started with the fact that PE is irrelevant, but we ended with justifying what the PE of the company should be based on free cash flow. So I think somewhere down the line, we all agree that yes, PE is not the only barometer, but it is an important barometer. The second thing is, I completely agree with what Saurabh says, that PE for different sectors, different kinds of companies, different management would be different, but there would be definitely a band as far as PE is concerned. Third is, again, completely agree that how much valuation or a P multiple or XYZ multiple you give to a company will also depend on the growth rates. And, while agreeing completely that P is not the only barometer, it's one of the, I would say, good, simple barometers. Ultimately, the growth has to justify how much P are you paying for a company. And I think that is where we have a lot of issues. In hindsight, we can always say that from this date, which was the worst period, to this date, which was the best period, these companies grew at XYZ percentage, and therefore we should have given that kind of a P. First of all, on that date, we don't know that whether this company is going to grow at 25% for the next 25 years, or next 15 years, or next 5 years, or next 10 years. Otherwise, our lives would have been so easy. Second is, I would say that things are getting more and more competitive. The millennials and the other young guys are more open to experimenting than any of us would have. So, when we make our house, we want to go in for plywood and veneer. The new guys don't care. Well, MDF hai to MDF, they want things which will last for 3-4 years, and they will change it. And I think that is going to be the case for a lot of things. We would go in for a shirt or a t-shirt made out of some cloth which we have been using for 25 years. And you guys will just go like design. They don't care whether it is X, Y, Z. And I think that stickiness of or longevity of growth and sustainability of growth has changed quite dramatically. So I think I would say that P is not the only factor, but it is an important factor. And ultimately, just to put one point on capital investment versus capital light, I'll give you an example. There's a company which has a market cap of 1 lakh crore, and there is a company which has a market cap of 50 crores. The 50 crore company, can become 3x. And a 1 lakh crore company cannot even become 2x. But how much money can you deploy in a 50 crore market cap company? On an absolute basis, you will end up making 5 crores. In a 1 lakh crore company, on an absolute basis, you can even make 5,000 crores. So I think companies will require big investment. There is also an opportunity to invest big. Companies which don't require big investment, the opportunity from an investor's perspective also is limited. And again, every type of investing ultimately works. It is up to a particular investor of what works for that particular investor and what doesn't work. But the only thought process is that there cannot be an unlimited PE multiple based on XYZ parameters. You can't value the same company at 20p, at 50p, at 100p, at 200p. There's no end. And if that was the criteria, then portfolios which were made in 1960, the same portfolio should have worked even now, because the basics and the basic tenets are the same. There should have been no change in the portfolio. So that is where my view would be.
Sunil, that is a point very, very well made. You can't have a situation of unlimited PE for any company, no matter how much it grows. You also made a very pertinent point on the millennial preferences, which has implications for predictability of earnings growth over long periods. But before I come to that point, Saurabh, all your points are well taken. The whole idea of capital intensity, high free cash flows, management quality, accounting, and all of that. But when you look at a set of companies like, Asian Paints, Pidilite, Marico, HDFC Bank, all of these companies, the quality companies that you also talk about 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even 20 years ago, many of these companies were still seen as very well-established companies with proven management. HDFC Bank, I remember, even in 2000, it was seen as a very agile, proven management. Asian Paints was a very revered company. Marico was still seen as a very innovative company, even in 2000. So what is it that has really changed in the last 4 or 5 years that we have to revisit the kind of multiples that we are willing to give them? Because the story was pretty much the same earlier.
So let me link this to what Sunil is saying. Sunil is absolutely right. An investor's job today, I think, is much harder than it was 10 years ago for two different reasons. Firstly, as Sunil rightly said, because technology has made it so easy to set up a new business, and because the customer, the millennial customer, is so open-minded, convenience chahiye, affordability chahiye, and he is willing to give you your product a shot, right? It's become much easier to compete and dislodge an incumbent, right? So the life cycle in my 13 years in India, I've seen businesses being created, being acquired, and going to zero. So I'll give you an example. When I came to India, this callback thing was getting very popular. You would call a number and you would get a text message. So there was a company called ZipDial in 2008, I remember, had started it. By 2011, 12, 13, callback was a complete, popular service to offer. Even P&G, Unilever had tied up with ZipDial to do callback campaigns, right? 2013 or 2014, I distinctly remember Twitter, it's not some VC, Twitter paid $70 million to acquire ZipDial, right? That year, a company called Jio was launched to offer basically free mobile phones. The whole callback product died by 2015. I think ZipDial was basically finished, right? So in 7 years, company goes from zero leadership acquisition by a leading MNC and then to zero again, right? And there are many other examples. This is the one which readily comes to us. So technology has made it much easier to attack new markets, take over markets, and at the same time, technology has also made it easy for those companies that you mentioned, Asian Paints, Pidilite, Nestle, right? It's made it much easier for them to scale businesses with minimal reinvestment. So let me give an example of why this piece, right? This piece is central to understanding how investing is changing. I stress again, it's becoming harder because new entry and attack is easier. But at the same time, in a high quality management's hands, modern technology gives them ability to expand the business with incremental extra kharcha. And the best example I can cite to you is Dr. Lal Path Labs. Right? The Delhi I grew up in the late 80s used to have the same Dr. Lal Path Labs, which is listed in the market today. They got listed around 5 years ago. And for 3 years, the stock didn't move. People said, expensive on PE. Right now, what people hadn't realized, because many people hadn't done the extra work, was over the last 5-6 years, Dr. Lal Path Labs added a whole range of wellness products to the conventional blood test and urine test and so on. These wellness products had twice the operating margin of their conventional products, right? So as soon as you did that maths, you realize with minimal extra cash burn, Manchanda and team are going to get their operating margin up. And the ROIC over the last 7-8 years went from, I think, 40-45. The ROIC, return on invested capital, went to 90%. Right? So smart management team, modern technology, right? Apps, mobile phones allowed them to expand the offering without, they had to buy some new machines for the cancer detection test and the genomics test and so on. But minimal extra capex may, you expand the offering, you expand the ROIC, right? And that's the power of technology combined with a smart management team. So if it's a lazy management team, not on its, not awake, not alive, Sunil is absolutely right. Technology means that your margins will be destroyed in the next few years. If it's a switched on management team, right? Let's take another example, Pidilite. 1970 to 2000, they built the Fevicol business. Last 20 years, they built the waterproofing business. Now they're building the third monopoly. Right? Switched on management team, switched on promoters, taking advantage of India's progress to build franchise after franchise after franchise. And therefore, your cash compounding engine is running at 25% free cash flow compounding over long periods of time, thus justifying very high.
No, but I differ that. I don't think any of these companies have 25% compounding for 25 years. There is a big difference in the numbers, at least the way we calculate. Asian Paint has grown at like 11-12% last 10 years, and we had the discussion. So I don't know where these numbers are coming from, but,
So happy to do a session where we publish the numbers, you can publish the numbers. Pidilite, I'm looking at it right now, free cash flow growth over the last 20 years, 26%. Free cash flow growth. Last 20 years, 26%. And Sunil, there's no great surprise here. The ROIC, return on invested capital, has gone from being 22%, 23% at the turn of the century to 48%. And as I said, the reason for that, I'm also putting on the table. They had Fevicol, 2000 or 2001. They bought the two waterproofing businesses, M-Seal and Dr. Fixit. They paid, I think, 100 odd crores for those. Over the last 20 years, they've used the Fevicol distribution channel to sell M-Seal and Dr. Fixit through the same channel. As a result, the ROIC has return on invested capital has broadly doubled. Now, I completely agree with you, Sunil. These businesses are few and far between. Most businesses.
No, I think we had a discussion. See, I have absolutely no issues in giving a higher PE multiple to companies which grow 25% sustainably.
Right, sir.
In fact, we had come out with a paper towards the end of 2019 where we had given a list of companies with vis-a-vis the perception that they're growing at 20-25%, were actually growing at 10-11% CAGR over the last 10 years. Now, we can take a base at 2001, which was the worst period in the global history. It was a massive recession, if you remember, just after .com as a base. And then we can, justify X, Y, Z. But what I'm trying to say is if a company is growing at 25% year after year, and if the view is that for the next 10, 15 years also, that growth is going to be there, we can always justify a higher P. But most of these companies are not growing at those levels, including the Hindustan Lever and the Nestle's and the Colgates of the world. In fact, Colgate has been growing at below nominal GDP growth rate. India has grown last 10 years at a nominal GDP growth rate of 11%.
Absolutely, sir.
If these companies are so great, they should grow significantly over the nominal growth rate. If you're growing at the nominal GDP growth rate of India, that means you are not making any effort. If the GDP is growing at 11% and a company is growing at 11%, then what are you doing? Nothing. Yeah.
So I don't think there's any debate there. Absolutely, Sunil, that most companies in India have struggled to grow. In fact,
and we were at a base where India was struggling. Now we are there where, the penetration of a lot of these products is significantly higher. So, earlier, maybe 50% of India's population was using toothpaste. Now 95% of India's population using toothpaste.
Right, sir.
And the same would be the case with a lot of other products.
Agree with you. Absolutely.
That's absolutely the point that I wanted to make. In the past 20 years, I mean, the debate on the numbers that you guys are talking about really is not a debate at all, because these are all verifiable, past published numbers and therefore verifiable. But as far as I can recollect, I think the only company that has grown earnings at more than 20% for 20 years is HDFC Bank. I mean, I think we did the numbers some time ago too, and I don't think there is any other company that comes close to that. But that apart, Saurabh, the very fact that these companies are bigger in size today, and the fact that in many of the product categories that we are talking about, the penetration levels are higher, and also considering the disruption that is being caused by the technology world, even if they have grown 20-25% last 20 years, how can you assume that these can grow at these elevated levels for the next 10-20 years?
Right. So that's exactly the point that I've been trying to make, right, over in my books and so on, that what's happened in India, and I completely agree with Sunil that this is a critical inflection point, the last 10 years. The last 10 years, as we all know, Nifty EPS growth has been close to zero, right? But as Sunil just said, nominal GDP growth has been around 10-11%, right? That's also, whatever people might say about the government data, 10-11% nominal GDP growth has happened. I mean, some might say a little bit more, some might say a little bit, but roughly 10-11% GDP growth has happened. Nifty EPS growth is zero. We can see that from the Nifty's own published EPS, right? So clearly, that GDP growth that's happened has disproportionately benefited a small set of companies, right? And if you delve deeper, if you take, say, CMI data or ACE equity data, kahin se bhi data le lo, what you can see is what's happened is the top 20-30 profit generators in our country. These are listed companies, and you can take the overall corporate India ka profitability from Ministry of Corporate Affairs, right? So, Ministry of Corporate Affairs is a lovely database. You can download 20,000 companies ka data. What's happened is 10 years ago, the top 20-25 profit generators in India only accounted for 30% of the nation's profits. Now, right, and I got the data just before COVID. I don't have it for the end of this fiscal. I have it at the end of last fiscal. FY20 end, the top 20-25 profit generators in India account for 90% of India's profits, right? So what we have done is taken India's growth over the last 10 years, and the benefits have disproportionately gone to a small set of companies, right? Now, why is that happening? It's happening because in many industries, the smaller players are getting crushed and the market is consolidating. You cited one very prominent example, HDFC Bank. RBI data would show that banking credit offtake in the last 10 years would be what? 11-12%. HDFC Bank, as you rightly said, loan book growth has been 20-odd%, right? Clear consolidation, right? And even then, HDFC Bank has just reached 7%, I think, country mein loan book growth share. Just imagine the upside there. But similar trends have fructified, for example, in adhesives, for example, in waterproofing, because there is no RBI, the data is not as evident. But our crunching would suggest that in both waterproofing and in adhesives, Pidilite's market share or profit share would be around 90%. I don't think that was the case 10 years back, right? So that's one dimension. You're formalizing the country. Smaller companies are getting crushed because they don't have the technology, they don't have the managerial expertise to benefit from, as Sunil said, a far more competitive country. A different dimension is the ability of well-run companies to take free cash flow from product X and set up product Y. Right? Pidilite is one example. Dr. Lal, I was giving you another example. They took free cash flow from basic patch tests and they reinvested that in setting up the wellness division, where they're doing way beyond cancer and genomics and executive health checkup and so on. Right? Now these sorts of opportunities where it's an integrated large market. Right? What is the downside of an integrated large market? As Sunil said, greater competitive intensity. Right? You're doing Dr. Lal Path Labs, you have Metropolis, you have Thyrocare, you have Mankind, you have other people coming in. What is the positive of a large market with technology-enabled growth? For a smart management team, you can use your existing franchise allied to technology, ramp free cash flows. And Sunil, I'm happy to share the data. Free cash flow, I checked Pidilite again. You take 9 to 19, 2 to 21, 3 to 21, free cash flow growth is very strong. Because and I was thinking through again, because they were able to take another product, waterproofing, and put it in the Fevicol channel. So with minimal extra kharcha, you're driving another layer of growth. Now, I again submit that there are two problems with this type of investing. Firstly, that say if I say 10 companies will grow like this over the next 5 years, I might get 5 wrong. But on the other five, even if I get 50% right, I will more than make up for the mistakes. Second piece is the Purana style of investing.
Okay. Make your second point and then I'll ask.
Second piece is the old style of investing, where I buy a low PE stock and it goes to say 30 PE and I sell. All I'm playing is say 2-year, 3-year window. And maybe you're right, it could double in that time period. But this style of investing, if I invest in say 10 such stocks, I get 5 right. On those 5, I can make around 8 to 10x in 10 years, around 20-25% compounded over 10 years, right? So it's two different styles of investing. Yes, if we can find a Pidilite at low PE, nothing like it, right? I don't think any of us will complain. But the point I'm saying is, a decade ago, it wasn't apparent to me that India was giving us the opportunities to find franchises which could scale. The same company could scale vertical after vertical.
No, Saurabh, just to add here, we are not advocating that we should only buy low PE stocks. I think the only point which I am trying to make is that the PE you pay has to justify the future cash flows from the company. Yeah. And those cash flows are what you believe are going to be the case.
Absolutely.
And that would be a function of what has happened over the last few years and what can possibly happen in the next few years. So it's not that you only buy 5 PE stocks. You can buy 25 PE stocks. Apple you can buy 30 PE stocks, which is growing at 35% CAGR, throwing much more cash than what India has ever done.
Yes.
I think that the challenge is, one, in India, these companies trade at the highest level anywhere else in the world. And it's not that only India has these kind of companies. There are companies which are there everywhere else in the world. The largest paint company in the US grows at higher rate than the largest Indian company. And despite that, it trades at 1/3 the valuation with a higher ROEs and a higher cash flow. So I think that point, what I am trying to make is that the growth rate has to justify the price you're paying for it. So obviously, if a company is growing at 50% every year and you have the view that it's going to grow like that for the next 5-10 years, you're not going to get it at 5 PE. You'll have to pay a 50-60 PE. But if a company is growing at 10 PE and if you're paying 70 PE multiple, and if a return expectation from that company is 10%, that company will have to trade at 70 PE for the rest of its life infinitely. And that has not happened anywhere in the world. You are very good in data. You can dig out the data.
Absolutely.
There is not a single company which has traded at 50, 60, 70 P multiple for like 10, 20, 30 years.
So you're absolutely right. If we overpay for a modest growth company,
yeah. So Pidilite might have done 20% CAGR, whatever cash flow, but a lot of the other companies, including the best of multinational companies, have not done that.
Right. So the multinationals is actually the valuation trap, if you ask me. So Mahalakshmi, where is the valuation trap, right? So just to hark back to the beginning of your discussion, a lot of Indian investors are making the mistake. They're saying Google trades at itna valuation, so other multinationals should also trade. Other glamour stocks should also trade. Now let's take a simple example. Let's take Colgate Palmolive or Castrol. Both have very high PI, both very high ROC. Both will have, I think, 110% ROC, right? Now, for different reasons, their franchises, their volume growth is low. So if you have a low growth engine, then the ROC is pointless. The fact that you have strong barriers to entry, you have strong brands, strong franchise. I, as an investor, I'm not getting anything in return for that. Just because you have high ROC, I don't care, no, because I need ROC to generate growth. So where you see ROC without underlying growth in the franchise, Sunil's point is bang on.
That is exactly what we are advocating. So just because someone has 100% ROE, whether you will give 100 P, I think that is a big fallacy there. You have a 10% growth, you can't trade at 70, 80 P multiple. That's the simple point we have tried to make in our report also.
And I think this is why I said at the beginning, all of us will agree on that.
LCS portfolio managers, obviously, I said in the beginning, everyone will have a different perspective. But at the same time, an economy is made of different sectors. And as a diversified portfolio, I think our horizon is across the sectors. And the other thing is to invest big sums of money. You might get a better ROE generating financial services company, but you're not going to be able to invest 100, 200, $500 million like you can invest in, say, an HDFC bank or an ICICI bank. I'm just giving you a perspective. So somewhere, you'll also have to see how much capital can that company absorb. And what has happened, Mahalakshmi, over the last 5-7 years is, see, these companies, they don't need capital. And in fact, a lot of these companies have even resorted to buybacks. So the number of shares available has reduced. Proponents of quality like Saurabh have increased. So obviously they have been buying more of these companies, putting pressure upwards on the price. And when the funds do well, you get more money. So you end up buying more. And then you have this dumb investment in the form of ETF. I call them dumb because they don't take a view. Whatever is in the underlying, they have to buy. So you get more money in the ETF. Someone comes in MSCI, you go up. 20% of the return generated by these companies have been thanks to the finance minister who reduced the tax. And that one day the stocks went up 20%. If you remove that day, for the last 2 years, a lot of these companies have made zero returns. If you remove that one day, a lot of these companies have made zero returns over the last 2 years.
So Saurabh, do you see this as a change in trajectory for these stocks? I mean, are the stock prices getting lopsided because of money flows?
So Mahalakshmi, if that were the case, you
take the example of Hindustan Lever, it stopped moving. The day the $3 billion float got sold in the market, Hindustan Lever stopped moving. Because whoever wanted Hindustan Lever has $3 billion of Hindustan Lever. From that day, the return on Hindustan Lever has been zero.
So we don't have HUL in our portfolio, but let me explain what's been the good story, what's been the bad story. So I've been doing this for 4 years, and that's why I say, compared to Sunil's wisdom, my wisdom is nothing because I have a lot to learn. So my colleagues and I, we've seen there's a pattern here. If you do this across, say, a portfolio of 13, 14 stocks, Mahalakshmi, and I've wrote about this in the Unusual Billionaires as well, and in Coffee Can Investing. If you do this across a portfolio of 13, 14 stocks, you're looking for champion franchises, good accounting, reinvestment of capital, underlying engine, you want to see it growing at 20, 25%. In any given year, 3-4 stocks do really well, right? And maybe it's for the reason Sunil mentioned, some ETF buys it, some finance minister does something, whatever. 3-4 stocks do really well in a given year. 3-4 stocks are on a holiday that year. I call them they take a valuation holiday that year. 3-4 stocks give you index return. So of the total portfolio, we're able to get 20-25% going, right? Because 3-4 have taken a holiday, 3-4 have done well, and 3-4 have been broadly at the index level. The next year, The next year, the identity changes. I keep the portfolios. Our portfolios are very low churn. The identity changes, and for reasons the reasons which are not predictable. The 3-4 that were on holiday, 2 or 3 of those start moving. The 3-4 that were doing well the preceding year, they go on a holiday, and the middling guys keep on chugging, right? So the way we have tried to see it is, rather than agonize endlessly about one stock and uska PE kya hai, we've said let's focus on the totality of the portfolio, make sure that every company has underlying compounding engine of around 20-25%. If every engine is tuned to the best of our ability, then in the totality of the portfolio, we will get earnings compounding of 20%, right? And that's broadly how it's played out. I wish every year all the stocks compounded, but wo hota nahi hai. Every year, 3-4 do well, 3-4 are on a holiday, 3-4 are middling, right? And we've obviously for professional reasons, I've looked very hard to see, can I change this if we were to do similar quality and lower PE, right? And we've realized PE itself has no predictive power. So I don't disagree with Sunil that you can't disregard a PE. Nobody in their right mind who's running money, managing money should disregard PE.
So Saurabh, one follow-up question before we bring in Sunil on the same points. When you talk about a set of companies like the ones that we are talking about right now, which proven management and a very stable earnings growth trajectory over long periods of time, there is really no surprise in these companies left. So you forego any opportunity for any re-rating in future.
That's something which is critical. I think we shouldn't, and I shouldn't, purport to reach out to the public and say, trust me with your money, I'm going to invest in a company that will re-rate. Because it's honestly beyond my remit. It's beyond my purview. How am I going to?
That's exactly my question. Let me complete my question. My point is, you forego the opportunity for any re-rating, but
when I say the stocks don't perform, they perform on earnings, but the PE does, the share price doesn't fire. So just be clear again, 14 stock portfolio, 3-4 are performing on earnings and stock price. 3-4, the earnings are coming through, but the stock price is going nowhere. Example, HDFC Bank, right? In the run up to Aditya Puri ji's retirement, HDFC Bank did nothing for 2 years. Earnings are 20-25%. But the stock went nowhere because the market was worried, right? So the 3-4 that I'm talking that don't fire, it's on share price. But if the business is firing, I have no business saying stock is not moving, let me check out, right? Now, if we have a portfolio of 14 stocks, such stocks, will we make a mistake on 1 or 2 franchises? Absolutely we will. But what I shouldn't be doing, I shouldn't be in the business of is telling the client, trust me, I can re-rate the stock. Because that is absolutely beyond my purview, right? Furthermore, PE is a mean reverting metric. Even if I re-rate the stock, that could derate, and some of the stocks which have derate could re-rate, right? So, and again, there's solid data on this. If you look at the Indian market, broadly speaking, BSE 500.
In fact, this is exactly my question. When you say you cannot rely on PE because it's a mean reverting metric and you're relying only on earnings growth, meaning you forego any opportunity for a valuation upside, but you do risk any valuation downside, then how do you build a margin of safety, or for that matter, any sort of offsetting mechanism in your portfolio to better your odds?
Well, I'll explain again. So this is the core of this is the reason why the PE debate is very interesting. Traditional value investing around low PE stocks relies on reversion to mean, i.e. high stocks with high PE will go down and vice versa. So following this line of thought, many investors go for low PE stocks thinking they're underpriced. Then when the PE goes up, they say valuation gap has closed. They say juice is squeezed out of the orange. So they should now sell and move to the next low PE opportunity, right? And I used to see a lot of this in my brokerage days. This does not work for high quality franchises with good management teams who are able to scale opportunity after opportunity, decade after decade. They keep squeezing the orange, right? And the Pidilite example I gave you is a case in point, right? Now, effectively what's happening is, if you're one of those investors who sets target prices and you sell when the TP is hit, you'll be dead wrong when it matters the most, which is with exceptional franchises, right? Whether it is Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, or little Saurabh Mukherjee, all of us make most of our money on a few exceptional franchises, right? Coke in the 80s, 90s, Microsoft, Apple for Buffett in the last 10, 15 years. If you apply mean reversion frameworks around PE to what's called now fate-defying franchises, you will be cutting your winners prematurely. And if you ask me, that's the greater damage of the PE obsession. It's not so much that I will buy a few crap stocks. Chalo, uska downside to modest hai. The biggest damage of this PE obsession is you cut your exposure to champion franchises saying, "Arey 50, 50, 60, 70 ka PE ho gaya. Let me check out," because you fail to appreciate the ability of the management team to keep re-rating the stock, not because they're doing something extraordinary, because they're using modern technology to ramp industry after industry. Right? And this is the central point, right? This is why technology, the technology point you began with, has changed the way investing works. And people like us are still trying to grapple with it fully. This is why investing today is harder than it was 10 years ago.
Well, I have my own take on this, on the point that you're making, that extraordinary companies stop to be mean reverting. One can think of several examples, but what is top of mind is Infosys. You know, it took about 5 to 6 years to climb back to its 2000 peak. It came the same levels you could see only in 2005 or 6, if I remember correctly. The other example often quoted is HUL, which didn't move for 10 years from, I think, 2000 to 2010 or 2001 to 2011. But let me get Sunil on this. Sunil, do you believe that extraordinary companies with very good management and moat and all the qualities we talk about stop to be mean reverting? And more importantly, can you really count on that as a strategy?
I don't believe that, and there are a lot of instances. Saurabh Mukherjee alluded to Warren Buffett and a lot of other eminent investors. You go back to 1980s, there was a similar kind of phenomena in the US where all these quality companies traded at 50, 60, 70 P multiple. And then for 20 years, they gave you zero returns. You mentioned Infosys. From 2000 to 2012, Infosys gave you zero returns. From 2001 to 2011-12, Hindustan Lever gave you zero returns. For the last 10 years, ITC and Castrol has given you zero returns. They have all been messiahs of corporate governance and quality and XYZ and so on and so forth. So I don't believe in that. I'll again come to the same thing. Quality is very important. Even when we are investing, the first, in our MEETS framework, the first point is management. Unless you are confident on the management, you will not invest. But what is the quality of the management, and who are we to give a certificate that this quality management is the best and some other quality management is not good? I don't know. 10 years profit of the largest paint company is lower than 6 months profit of the largest steel company. I'm not saying that we should put everything in steel, but should we ignore it? I don't think. There are cycles. We have to, as investors, look at it. The other thing is, the best bank, which you all mentioned last 3 years, has underperformed ICICI Bank big time. So there is always a phase where, you say that now this is priced beyond perfection. And the price beyond perfection is a function of a lot of things. Fear of missing out, a lot of dumb money coming in, a lot of buying coming in, and a lot of other things. So what happens is last 5 years, the economy was not doing well. So investors were hiding. And this was a good space, as Saurabh mentioned, that even when the Nifty was not doing anything, these companies were growing at 8-10%. And therefore, it was a good space to hide in. There were auditor issues. These companies obviously did not have auditor issues. So there was this comfort. They are high dividend paying company. And then there was this tax rate cut and you had a 20% move there. And therefore, again, you had this whole cycle coming in. There is no company in the world. In the US, there have been only 5 companies in the last 10 years which have traded a P multiple of more than 50 times for more than 5 years. And that includes the companies like Google and Apple and Microsoft, all of them. They're trading at like now 30 times and people are talking that they are in a bubble kind of a scenario. Despite the fact that Alphabet grew at 35%, the results were just declared. So no company can keep on trading at 70, 80 P multiple forever because you'll always have an issue. The other thing is, when the interest rates were going down, there was a justification that now the PE will go up. So now the interest rates have started to go up, so the PE should go down. But now, the high P guys are not. Again, we are focusing a lot on P. My only thing is quality at any price doesn't work. It's never worked in the last 300 years of history in the US. It is not going to work in India. India is not unique. That in India, this will work, but in other parts of the world like China or Europe or US or even Indonesia and Brazil and Mexico, which are similar to India, it has not worked. But in India, it will work. I don't believe that.
But Sunil sort of made this interesting point that you don't get high quality companies like Pidilite at low or reasonable PE. If you get it, great, but you don't get them. So do you agree to that? And, in response, what do you do?
No, you will not get it at 10p, but if you work towards it, you will get it at a reasonable p. And the reasonable p might be 25, might be 30, might be 40, depending on the growth rate. Again, I am saying that if a company is growing at 25%, and if a view is that for the next 10 years, it is going to grow at 25%, we will not be shy of buying it at 40, 50p. The problem is buying a 10, 12% growth company at a 70, 80p. That we are not able to understand. You are getting cash flow. You mentioned technology companies. I think they're growing faster. You take out the last 10 years growth rate of all the 4 large technology companies and map them with the MNC companies, they're growing faster. And they traded 1/4 the valuation of most of these companies with a much higher cash conversion and significant, I would say distribution of cash by way of both dividends as well as by way of buybacks. But the rules are different for different. And as I said, who are we to decide that this company is the best quality and some other company is not the best quality? Just because we say, no, this is the best quality, then it becomes best quality. I don't know.
Okay. Now I want to bring in a really, really important question in my mind, with respect to predictability of future earnings. History shows us that most companies have not been able to navigate a change in technology or paradigm very well. Of course, this time we can always defend saying that technology is an enabler, and many companies with free cash flows, like you also articulated, will be able to leverage technology to further their business. But even then, if you see, about 2 years ago, one could have not imagined that Ola would be the next competitor for Mahindra and Mahindra or Bajaj Auto for that matter. Right? So competition is coming from the periphery and attacking any and every business in unknown ways. Given the situation, how can we justify paying a premium for predictability, number one? And do we not run the grave risk of overestimating the predictability of these companies?
I stress again, I think I agree with Sunil, and I agree with the point you began the discussion and you just made. The job of an investor today is far harder than it was a decade ago for 2 reasons. Technology is creating new competition, and the next reason it's hard, the job of an investor has become harder, is smart management teams are using that same technology to ramp again, right? So that's a double challenge for the investor. On the one hand, the downside risk is greater. The lovely example you cited, Mahalakshmi, Ola taking on the 2-wheeler manufacturers. And it's even harder because you kind of think Pidilite, or you think Dr. Lal PathLabs, or you think Bajaj Finance, and then they do the next ramp, right? And that's why the investor has to now work doubly hard for the modest fees that he collects from investors, right? So how do we sort of reconcile this in our head, and how do we think about our day job, right? And the way we've thought about it is that the successful investing has increasingly become about making superior judgments about qualitative factors, right? I wish it wasn't. I wish it was easier, but the I don't get to choose. Successful investing has increasingly become about making superior judgments about qualitative factors such as management quality, such as governance, such as the ability of management to use technology and drive longer term compounding, right? Now, how do we do that? How does any investor do that? In a way, is the sort of the homework exercise that all of us have had to deliver in the last 4 years. So, for example, I don't have time to give the entire framework. I'll give a couple of simple things that we do. We look at to what extent does the boardroom of a company, the C-suite, are they people who have grown in the company over 10 years, or are they lateral hires? Right? So whether it is an HDFC Bank or an Asian Paints or a Fine Organics, we prefer companies where people are recruited early in their career and they grow into the boardroom, because it suggests that these people know the company well, they know the industry well, and the company has a great ability to groom talent. Second thing we look for is we look for decentralization of authority. If you have a Hitler running the company who barks out orders, Lalaji barks out orders morning, evening, we tend to stay away. We speak to the zonal management and say, to what extent are you given clear targets, incentives, support on marketing, technology, and how are you then encouraged to run the business? We like decentralized companies. We like companies which nurture talent, grow talent. These sorts of softer factors, and there's around 7 or 8 of them, have become a critical part of our lives, right? Alongside reading the annual report and forensic accounting and all that, right? And that's why the job of an investor today, I think, is very different from what it was a decade back. Technology has made our lives tougher, new entries easier, competition comes from unexpected sources, and at the same time, smart management teams are able to use technology and ramp further. Obviously, they don't call me up beforehand to say, Saurabh, we are about to use this technology. We have to do the work and say, this company looks to have an able management team. Again, maths comes to our favor. You get 5 right like this, you get 5 wrong. This is the basic compounding, right? Simple compounding. If you give me 10 rupees, on 5 rupees, if I turn it to 0 on the other 5, if I give you 10x in 10 years, 26%, I would have turned your 10 rupees into 50 rupees, 18% compounding. So the maths comes to our rescue. But the job of an investor is to swing the odds so that you compound, say, a little bit higher than 20 rather than lower than 20. But investing has changed fundamentally in the last decade or so. We are still trying to understand the full extent of the change. Qualitative factors, making a judgment call on softer factors has become, unfortunately, incredibly important.
So going by that logic, Sunil, it's a lot easier to take these calls on multinational companies because the processes are very well laid out and therefore the downside is limited from a management perspective. And it's far more difficult to take calls on, smaller companies, and especially because you invest in the mid-cap space, the risk will tend to be much bigger. So how do you navigate that and how do you protect your downside?
One is we don't only look at mid and small cap. We also invest in large cap. That is point one. Second is, again, I will just go back to my earlier point. Every investor will have a different thought process and a different way of investing and a different objective. A lot of these companies started small. I think Pidilite maybe in 2000, and Saurabh is alluding to, would have been 1/100th of the market cap what it is, which would make it a micro cap, not even a small cap in the current parlance. So, you have to start looking at them young, and that is the only way you can play the compounding. The other thing is, it is a fallacy to say that larger companies are good management and mid-sized companies are bad management. I don't know why we believe that. So the moment you talk about mid-cap, people say, management mein problem hai. Most of the scams which have happened in the world are in large companies. Small companies are so small that what scam they will do. Most of the scams have happened in the large companies only. So I think it is not any different. The only thing, obviously, when a company is large, the foundation is very strong, the balance sheet is very large and strong, and therefore the near-term volatility impacts them less than some of the smaller peers. But ultimately, I think the investment, the way of investment would be similar. The other thing is that any company which is only value does not give you returns. And therefore, in our framework also, we look at companies where profit growth can be at least 2x in the next 5 years. Only value does not give you return. You might be lucky, there's a boom in the market and you might make return, but unless there is a profit growth, you will not make consistent returns. And the thought is very clear: when you are investing in a company or becoming a partner in the business, and you would like to become a partner in a business which is growing, because then your value keeps on growing. If you just want value, it is only one time uptick when the value gets realized that you will make. But if a company is growing consistently in terms of profit, your value keeps on going and growing, and therefore your the margin of safety, as you said, keeps on getting better and better. The other thing is, I think very clearly, if you have matrices which are based on ROE, we are not looking at 90% ROE companies at ETP. We are okay with the 25-30% ROE company, but which is growing at 15% and available at 15-17p. Our view would be that there is more money to be made there, because a lot of these companies will graduate into a size where a lot of investors would not afford to miss them, you know. And the last bit is, if it was just a buy and hold strategy for 30, 40, 50 years, I don't think I and Saurabh and hundreds and thousands of portfolio managers would have been needed also. You know, the portfolio which was created in 1960 would have survived in 1970, would have survived in 1980, would have survived in 1990, and will keep on surviving for the next 50 years. You know, so if Saurabh is going to have these 10 companies, you know, he doesn't even need to work. He just has to go on a holiday, because those 10 companies will keep on compounding for the next 10 years. His AUM will also be 10x, and the investor will also be happy.
So Saurabh, how do you respond to that? What if investors say, well, you have done your hard work and research, you've already told us your secret sauce, you've told us which companies, it's a small group of 10, 15 companies, you have also told us that you have to stay put over the next 10 years.
That's why I write a book every year. Every year I write a book and I give away all our intellectual property. I'm very happy for people to read our books and you know, from Unusual Billionaires, Coffee Can Investing, to the next book, which I hopefully COVID permitting will come out over the course of the summer. But the reason Sunil and I have a job is it's very easy for people to understand what we do.
But Sunil is not writing books and giving away his methodology or his talks.
No, I don't read, and I am not as smart as Saurabh is, so I can't write a book, unfortunately.
You are giving away your intellectual property every year.
And I personally believe that the moment I write a book, people will believe that I am on the path of retirement, which I am not.
No, don't say that. I don't think you are retiring anytime soon.
40 books on Warren Buffett. Right? There are 40 books on Warren Buffett, and the Berkshire Hathaway annual report pretty much tells you what the company owns.
Yeah.
But there's only, in spite of that, and in spite of this being true for the last 50 years, I think 1970, I think Warren Buffett acquired, perhaps a little earlier than 1970, acquired Berkshire Hathaway. So everybody knows what Warren Buffett does, right? In fact, all of us would like to think we know even better than he does what he does. But it's very difficult to do.
So that's the beauty, you know, about Warren Buffett. Everybody thinks they know what Warren Buffett is doing, but nobody knows what Warren Buffett is doing. He does things that he does not talk about, and he keeps surprising. He keeps surprising everybody.
He does is simple, Mahalakshmi, but it's not easy, right? And that's how investing should be. It should be simple, which is why we publish our book, so that people understand how simple it is. But just because it is simple, just because I was able to sort of download whatever it is that I've learned over the last 4 years, and a lot of it, I stress again, is because of the tutelage of people like Sunil. I really wouldn't be anywhere had it not been for a generation of legends like Sunil, who've taught me a lot of what I know, right? But just because it's simple to download what we tell people, whether it's through books or sessions like this, it doesn't mean it's easy to do, which is the only reason where busy people like you say, you know, we've got better things to do rather than worry about this. You know, here's our money, you run it for us. We will run magazines and publications and build a career in flying career in media.
Thank you so much, Sunil, Saurabh, both of you, for joining me on this discussion. It was really lively.
No, I'll just like to end here, Mahalakshmi, with the thing which I started, that every investor will have a different thought process, a different philosophy.
Correct.
And there is no magic formula that this will work and this will not work. I think at different stages, all of the good, passionate portfolio managers who are honest and who do their work with diligence will work. Saurabh mentioned that everyone knows what Warren Buffett does, but no one is able to mimic, because there is much more than only those formulas and numbers. You know, you also have to have that feel of what to do when, and to stick with your conviction when you're not doing well. It is very easy to stick with your conviction when you're doing well. It is the test is when you're not doing well. That is the time when you stick to your conviction and say, no, ultimately, this will work.
Absolutely. Sure. You nailed it, Sunil.
Thank you so
much. Thanks a lot.
I won't publish till I retire.
Just looking.
Thanks. Take care, folks. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.